On the way in to Spark Arena, Johnny's phone rang, and he's like, oh, that's an odd number. And he thought, oh, it's a Canadian number. It's probably one of the event people. And he goes, hi, Johnny speaking. He goes, Johnny, it's Michael. And so Michael Bublé phoned him directly just to say, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to roll. You guys are going to be amazing. And he just really created a really cool sense of just calm, I think, because he sort of set us up for a win, which was amazing.
And on the night, how was it playing in front of 12,000 people with Michael Bublé as one half of the duo twofold?
You say it like that and I'm sitting here going, is this really happening? Because it's been such a mental day of radio interviews, and then we were on breakfast this morning, and then I've had a little bit of downtime, and I was like, oh, that's when I've got another call, and it just keeps coming back up, and I'm like, this is surreal. This is just the most amazing experience. In New Zealand, they're just so warm and embracing, and they just cheered us on, and it just felt really relaxed, really natural.
Well, good on you, Vanessa, the person who's got a better voice than Michael Bublé. That's what he said himself. Wonderful stuff. Hey, Victoria, Selwyn, kia ora to you both. Been a wonderful show. Appreciate it. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. I will see you then.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the $128 million university bailout package that the government says isn't a bailout. Education Minister Jan Tinetti is live. The socially conscious power company shocking customers with monster electricity bills and claims it's lights on but nobody home when they call to complain. We talked to the founder of Nau Mai Rā. The bold bridge promise, Coromandel State Highway 25A, will be reopened in 9 months. They've got the money. Now all the Ruapehu ski fields apparently need is snow and a tasty morsel of a story about lab-grown meat and what it could mean for New Zealand. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. It appears universities will still cut jobs despite a big funding boost today. The government's increasing subsidies for degree and postgraduate enrolments next year and in 2025 at a cost of $128 million. It follows warnings Otago and Victoria universities must cut hundreds of jobs due to falling enrolments. Otago's acting Vice-Chancellor Helen Nicholson couldn't say how many jobs the extra funding might save.
The problem is that whilst the funding will be helpful from 2024 onwards, it doesn't give us any immediate relief for 2023, and so we will still have to address those immediate financial issues.
Victoria University Vice-Chancellor Nick Smith says the extra government funding should be enough to save about a third of the programs and jobs it's been planning to cut. The president of the Tertiary Education Union at Victoria University, Dougal McNeill, says the money gives the universities time to pause and think.
The next step is for the redundancy plans at Victoria and at Otago to be withdrawn, and then we can take part in that conversation about the funding model that the government has set out.
Dougal McNeill says he doesn't believe the cuts should go ahead when the government has responded to this crisis. The Prime Minister will hold his highly anticipated meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping later tonight. It'll be the first major diplomatic test for Chris Hipkins with such a significant bilateral relationship. Political editor Jane Patterson is in Beijing.
China is New Zealand's largest trading partner, a constant balance given the tensions between it and New Zealand's Western partners, most notably the US. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta is downplaying a report in Australian media that she was harangued for an hour during her March trip to Beijing. She says it was a robust conversation when New Zealand put forward its views and the Chinese made their position on various issues very clear. Human rights and the Ukraine war are sensitive issues Chris Hipkins says he will raise, but was reluctant to discuss in any detail ahead of tonight's meeting just before 9 o'clock New Zealand time.
A rural organisation fears it will struggle to stay connected as NZ Post plans to cut 750 jobs over the next 5 years, blaming declining mail use. Rural Woman Chief Executive Gabrielle O'Brien says that's a concern.
If we are sending out information to them and we need to send it by post, that increases our costs as well. There is always the potential that that will lead to less services available to people, less publications or less communication.
She says the elderly see the post as a lifeline. State Highway 35 north of Gisborne is closing around now so contractors can continue flood repairs. The stretch between Okitsu and Ruatoria will reopen at 7 tomorrow. Russian President Vladimir Putin has held a meeting with his security officials as he tries to present an image of business as usual. In a television address, Mr. Putin claims he let the weekend's Wagner Mutiny go on as long as it did to avoid bloodshed. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg says questions remain unanswered.
Although the president describes the organisers of the mutiny as criminals and traitors, as far as we know, the charges against Yevgeny Prigozhin are being dropped and he's free to go to Belarus, as far as we understand. So a controversial agreement, and people wanted to know what Vladimir Putin thinks about that, and he actually didn't address that point.
And a Waded Upper soccer club says the victim of a suspected hit and run is well known. Greytown Football Club member William Newton was found critically injured on State Highway 2 at about 7 on Sunday morning. Committee member Tim Stevenson says the club and wider community are rallying around the family.
The club is 120 members, so everyone knows everyone, and Will's just got a very strong, bright, bubbly personality, so he's very well known around.
William Newton remains in hospital. To sport now, and All Blacks midfielder Anton Leonard-Brown will miss at least the first 2 games of the Rugby Championship with a 3-week ban for a dangerous tackle in the Chiefs' Super Rugby final loss to the Crusaders. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Anton Leonard-Brown will miss the test against Argentina and South Africa, but could be available for the final test against Australia on July 29th. If he applies for the World Rugby Coaching Intervention Programme, which can cut suspensions by a week. Leonard-Brown was sin-binned during the final for a tackle on his Crusaders opposite Dallas McLeod and was subsequently cited by the judiciary after the game. The judiciary said the starting penalty point for the tackle was a 6-week ban, but Leonard-Brown was only given 3 because of his early guilty plea and his previous good record. The Tall Ferns take on world number 2 China tonight in their second Asia Cup basketball match in Sydney. It's a quick turnaround for the 29th ranked New Zealand side, who had an upset win over Korea yesterday. And guard Charlize Legger-Walker concedes that makes for a tough assignment.
These tournaments can be so hard just with the ask that you put your body through, and we just are going into this China game. Obviously they're a great side. They've got a lot of height and size and strength and always been very physical to play against, and that's something we've had to match in the past, and it's going to be a great test for us.
And the White Ferns' opening one-day cricket match in Sri Lanka has been delayed due to rain. The game was due to get underway at 4 p.m. That's the news.
Cricket rarity.
It was an absolute exhibition of what can be possible when women's Test match cricket gets the opportunity to be played.
A basketball pathway.
It's really exciting that the Breakers are actually treated as this is our 4th player to be drafted in the NBA draft.
And fishing for all.
International anglers come really looking for those experiences that only New Zealand can offer. But even there, you can pop into your local river and catch a good fish.
Hook, line and sinker. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taumarunui and Taupo. Showers, especially north of Hamilton. Frost or fog in the south tomorrow morning. Mainly fine for Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Isolated showers today. Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper, partly cloudy. Tomorrow, isolated showers clearing in the morning. Taranaki to Wellington, also Nelson. Scattered showers, clearing and becoming fine about and south of Manawatu tomorrow. From Bulla to Fiordland, mainly fine. Scattered rain developing north of Greymouth tonight and elsewhere for a time tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha. Mostly cloudy, rain from this afternoon, possibly heavy, clearing Marlborough and Canterbury tomorrow and becoming scattered showers elsewhere. Central Otago and Southland. Areas of low cloud or fog, rain spreading east from this evening, becoming scattered showers later tomorrow. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy, light rain. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 5. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, Nau Mai Rā ki Checkpoint Te Tēnei Rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Major job losses at 2 universities will go ahead despite a government rescue package. The government has announced a $128 million package to help cash-strapped universities, saying it's clear they need support. It has also announced a review of tertiary education funding, following warnings the university system is struggling. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
The funding boost announced today was prompted by plans for hundreds of job losses at Otago and Victoria universities. At Victoria today, staff and student leaders welcomed the news, but they doubted it would be enough to stave off significant cuts.
It doesn't sound like it's going to be enough to resolve the issue once and for all.
It's not enough to retain all staff this year, potentially.
The government's bought us time, and I think that's a vital first step.
Announcing the funding today, Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the money adds to a 5% increase announced in this year's budget. But he was adamant the money is not a bailout.
It's not a bailout because it's a contribution that we've stepped forward with to say to universities, we can see the pressure you're under. You're clearly under a great deal more pressure than when we started the budget process. A bailout, I think, would mean effectively going in and paying all the costs that the universities have. It's definitely not that.
He says universities were expecting increased enrolments this year. Instead, they've fallen and deficits are on the cards. But he says it's up to the universities to decide if they change the cuts they've been planning. And he indicated some cuts might be unavoidable.
Bear in mind that the 2 universities that have been most recently covered, Victoria and Otago, both have more staff now than they did before COVID. Other universities through the period of time recognised that given the funding system of bums on seats and enrolments that they needed to cut their cloth.
Today's announcement means an extra $6 million next year for Victoria and $10.5 million for Otago. Otago has signalled several hundred job losses, and its acting Vice-Chancellor, Helen Nicholson, says it's too early to say how many roles the government's announcement might save. She says in the meantime it will continue with voluntary redundancies.
The problem is that whilst the funding will be helpful from 2024 onwards, it doesn't give us any immediate relief for 2023, and so we will still have to address those immediate financial issues.
Victoria University has proposed cutting 229 jobs as a means of cutting about $23 million from its projected $33 million deficit. Its Vice-Chancellor, Nick Smith, says the extra government funding should be enough to save about a third of the programs and jobs it's been planning to cut.
We're looking very carefully at what the additional funding can do, and again how we can use it to take more time and to consider more carefully and how we can save as many programs and staff as possible.
Nick Smith says it's extraordinary that staff, students and university leaders have combined to successfully lobby the government. The government also announced a 2-year review of university funding and has asked for advice on whether universities' proposed cuts put any subjects at risk nationally.
That report from education correspondent John Gerritsen. It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Customers with huge electricity bills say they're being left in the dark, unable to connect with their provider, Nau Mai Rā, as the invoices keep rolling in. The business launched in 2019 as the first kaupapa Māori power company in Aotearoa and has been praised for using its company profits to help struggling customers pay their power bills. But now some have tripled and customers want to know why. Anastasia Hedge reports.
Nau Mai Rā customers are billed weekly and the money comes out via direct debit. Wiki noticed something was wrong when her weekly bill suddenly shot up to $275.
It didn't go out. They overdrew our account the week after
they tried to take out even more. At the end of the month, our account was overdrawn by at least, I think it was $1,596.70.
Wiki says her most expensive bill with her last company, Transpower, was $350 a month. After paying a $1,700 bill to Nau Mai Rā, 2 weeks later she was lumped with another whopper.
Holy heck, it's $1,200. How did I accumulate that much power in 2 weeks?
It was a similar story for Misha, who says her bills were reasonable when she joined Nau Mai Rā in November. But then she racked up an invoice for $350 for a week in April.
It was like high as, like 300 and something. I'm like, what the? We've only got one TV inside house, so I don't understand. And we just use that one TV to watch TV. So I don't understand why it's always like that. I've gone and minimised as much as I can because I thought it was myself.
Trying to query the amount with the company is also proving tough. Pare, who was with Nau Mai Rā for a year, noticed her direct debits weren't coming out in October, which left her owing $900, so she emailed them.
No one replied. I emailed their website. I messaged their Facebook page. The only one to reply back was the Facebook page to call a number. I called their number, no reply, left messages. That was ongoing for 6 months and I heard nothing.
The company requests customers contact Auntie. Pare says Auntie told her pay off the debt at $100 a week or go somewhere else. She has now left Nau Mai Rā and pays less.
We pay $20 a week now compared to between $30, $50, $90 and $100 every week to them.
Wiki says she tried phoning for a whole week and never got to speak to anyone.
You're on hold for 22 minutes, then the phone call ends. You go to book a call with the so-called auntie, and she was supposed to call me today. It's 2:17. She was meant to call me at 1 o'clock. Same with last week.
Nomaida told its customers on Facebook it needed to double its team to keep up with demand. Wiki says the company needs to answer questions.
You're saying that your company is for the people, when in natural fact you are making your people struggle more. You're making them go through more hardships with work and income. You're making it a high cost for them, even like you're just making them struggle. You're making all of us struggle again.
Nau Mai Rā co-founder Ezra Hirawani joins us now. Tēnā koe, Ezra.
Oh, kia ora, kia ora.
So what's going on here? Some customers with some pretty big bills and they're unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it is heartbreaking to hear, you know. I know it doesn't feel like it at the moment for many of our whānau, but, you know, we really do care and we are trying our best to support all our whānau, which, you know, contradicts to the way that they're feeling, and their feelings are most important. And so, yeah, like we mentioned on Facebook, we acknowledge that we're in a pretty tough time in Aotearoa at the moment with the cost of living crisis. And so it's really been a struggle with the surge in demand, with the amount of people who are falling into the needing support basket. One we thought that we'd be prepared for, but obviously one that we haven't done enough preparation for. And so we're working our hardest now to work with our whānau on the phone, to get back to emails. And it's not due to a huge increase of new customers, but more so an increase of those struggling that we're all just trying to work through and help them out with their variety of issues that they're facing. And so when people are onto the phone trying to get in contact with us, it's not that we're sitting there, you know, not answering phones, but it's because we're dealing with a large amount of whānau who are struggling coming through.
Okay, so that explains the customer service side of things. You don't have enough people to manage the volume of calls and inquiries you're getting. But what about what the customers are saying is a steep increase in the bills that you're charging them? One customer, a solo parent with 2 kids, saying that they got an outstanding power bill of $1,057 from the company. Another says in 6 weeks I had invoices totalling $850. Someone else saying last last week my bill came to $270 for the week, and saying that the bills are higher than the previous companies that they were with. And it's part of your kaupapa that you aim to charge whānau who come on board the same or less than what they paid with their other companies. So why are prices going up so high, Ezra?
Yeah, to be fair, there's always an explanation behind each power bill, and I don't know, what's causing the hikes in theirs, but there's a bunch of reasons that could be causing it. It sounds like there might be some meter issues with some of our whānau, which are some that we've dealt with. Oftentimes we could be dealing with an incorrect billing period, so someone switched from another power company coming over to us, and their final bill with them was, for a shorter amount of time than the usual billing cycle, and they've come to us, and so we've had to swallow some of the days. And so there's multiple reasons why a bill in particular could be more or even less than what it should be. It's just really taking the time and finding time to be able to discuss those with our whānau over the phone, which we're struggling with. But
Ezra, should it be 3 times what they usually are billed for, which is some of the complaints? 3 times?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And, so those are the customers, and there are customers like that or whānau that we're dealing with at the moment, and working through, is there something happening behind the meter? Is there something driving consumption? And so there's no way any given whānau should be experiencing 3 times, an increase on their power bill.
Do you actually do physical meter readings? Because that is one of the things that customers have complained to us about, saying someone doesn't come and read the meter. It's estimation.
It's not estimation. It's through smart meter data that we use, so it's accurate. But still, there might be faults, and so we do have a system and process in place where we try and identify if there is a fault there.
Okay, so previously you've said that you've had a deal with an undisclosed power generator giving you wholesale prices so you could afford to service lower income homes. Have you still got that deal, or is the power coming in costing you way more?
No, we've still got that deal.
Okay, so again, how can it be that some bills are 3 times higher than customers say they should be, and also they can't talk to anyone about it? They're going spare trying to get through to someone to correct the situation.
Yeah, we definitely feel that as well. To be fair, most of the issues that our whānau are dealing with are solved not quickly and nor easily, but are quite. They take a bit of investigation into after talking to us over the phone. But it's just, we've hired another person. They start tomorrow, and then we interviewed another person today. And so by the end of next week, our customer service team should be double the size it is now.
Okay, so how many people have you got taking customer service calls, Ezra?
We've got 5 at the moment that are full-time on the phones, with our whānau also in the email boxes as well. And historically, that's been, that's fine. We haven't increased our number of customers significantly. Again, it's just a significant amount of support needed from those struggling with just what's happening in Aotearoa at the moment.
Really appreciate you coming on the program this evening, Ezra. That's Ezra Hirawani, who is the co-founder of Nau Mai Rā, the power company. Do get in touch if they are your power company and let us know how you're going with them. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 5:20, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your thoughts on the government package, $128 million for universities around the country who are struggling. Some of them are still going ahead with cutting staff. Also, the issue of power bills there. Nau Mai Rā customers getting in touch with us saying they've had huge increases in the cost of power. Let us know what you are experiencing. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Both Otago and Victoria universities say the boost in funding announced today won't save all of the jobs they're planning to cut. Both have said they'll need to cut hundreds of jobs due to falling enrolments. The government will provide an extra $128 million in funding in the next 2 years to help fill the financial shortfalls in the tertiary sector. Otago's Helen Nicholson says the funding only kicks in next year, so cuts will still need to be made this year, while Victoria University's Nick Smith says it could save about a third of the jobs it's been planning to cut. But the president of the Tertiary Education Union at Victoria University, Dougal McNeill, says both universities should now withdraw their redundancy plans and start over. Community organisations and the union representing postal workers have fears about the future level of mail services, with NZ Post planning to cut 750 jobs over the next 5 years. But NZ Post Chief Executive David Walsh says services to rural communities won't decrease and the way it operates will be vastly different within the next 5 years. He says the volume of mail is 1/5 of what it was 20 years ago, and it expects that to decrease by half again by 2028. And the Prime Minister says he'll raise human rights and the war in Ukraine with China's President Xi Jinping when they meet in Beijing later tonight. Chris Hipkins is also expected to talk trade at the meeting, which is due to start at about 9 o'clock. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, State Highway 25 will close again in about 7 minutes at 5:30 after temporarily opening from 3:30pm. It's been closed between Waiomu and Ruapehu because of a slip, which is being cleared and stabilised. Depending on conditions, it'll be open for an hour in the morning between 7:30 and 8:30 and again in the afternoon 3:30 to 5:30. The following roads are closed: State Highway 2, Matawai to Te Karaka, State Highway 50, Te Kokino, State Highway 35 between Okitsu and Ruatoria. In Auckland, there'll be a full closure tonight westbound between Great North Road and Pārtiki Road, including the westbound State Highway 16 link to State Highway 20 southbound. Our next traffic news and headlines are at about 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. Returning to our earlier story, the government has stumped up $128 million for cash-strapped universities. Education Minister Jan Tinetti joins us now. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Universities are big businesses. Why does the government need to bail them out?
Well, we know we also need to have a really strong university sector. We know that the current funding model of what we're seeing at the moment is putting stress in the current conditions on our universities. So we know that this is the right step to take, particularly for the next 2 years, while we review the funding mechanism.
Have they been making some bad decisions with their money?
Certainly it's been very tough for them over this time, over the last few years, and that's all universities and all tertiary providers. There's a variety of reasons for that, COVID being number one. Different universities have taken a different approach to that. They have made decisions at different times, but what we can say is that we do need a really, really strong sector. This is really important for our country to develop our research and innovation.
But Minister, has there been some wasteful spending by some of the universities?
I think that we know that they're in issues. I can't go into the details of what that has looked like. I think that the review will bring that up. You know, going forward over that review that we're looking at, it will have a backward look to look forward as well. So I think I would just hold my opinion at that time until I see the results of what comes from the review.
Where did you magic the $128 million up from?
So it is an underspend. It is an underspend in vote tertiary education. It has come out of an underspend of the tertiary subsidies and the fees free because of the drop-off in enrolments. Now, normally that money would go back to the centre, so it wouldn't be repurposed in vote tertiary education. But look, we know that there's a great need here, particularly while we are undertaking a review, so we were able to reprioritise within the vote.
Okay, so is fees freeze a failed policy then? You're not getting the uptake?
No, absolutely not. We know that enrolments
then why have you got so much
spare
spare cash, Minister? If people were taking it up, you wouldn't have all this spare cash, would you?
We also know that we've got a tight labour market as well. We know that enrolments are down. They always are in tight labour markets. But we do have to make sure we're budgeting for what the maximum would be there.
Okay.
Or could be there, I should say.
So why don't people want to go to university? I mean, obviously some of them will take the opportunity to take up jobs, as you say, because of the tight labour market. But does that really account for such a significant drop-off in the role that you've got $128 million down the couch?
We do know that in the past that has had a significant impact. So history does tell us that when there is a tight labour market, that people don't tend to go up to higher education or take up higher education opportunities like the situation that we've got at the moment. But we also know that COVID has impacted on people's life plans as well, still working those things out. I can tell you from personal experience, I have a son in his late 20s who's just deciding to go back to university now, and that was just how he's seen the last few years and coming through those last few years. So I think, we are fairly confident that we are going to see that uptick, and the Ministry of Education and TEC have done that modelling. But, it's tough times.
Minister, have we simply got too many universities? Do one or some of them need to close up shop?
No, I don't believe that. But one of the parts that we have, or I have been asked by Cabinet to do, is to make certain that through all of this and through all of the changes that have been announced by our universities, that our provision is not being decimated across the country. So I think that is something that we will have conversations about, and I'm looking forward to having those conversations with Vice-Chancellors and Chancellors.
So
about
some
what the
double-up
provision does
courses,
look like.
Minister, some double-up courses could go.
Look, there is that issue around competition and how that can deplete what might be provided by different universities. So those are conversations that I'm really open to having with the universities.
Appreciate your time. That is Education Minister Jan Tinetti there. All Black Anton Lienert-Brown could miss the entire rugby championship. The Chiefs midfielder has copped a 3-week ban after being cited for a dangerous tackle during the Super Rugby Pacific final in Hamilton. The ban would see him miss the All Blacks' first test of the year in Argentina next weekend, as well as the Springboks game in Auckland and the final test against the Wallabies in Melbourne. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So, how did he end up in this situation, Felicity?
Well, the tackle in question is a head-on-head clash with Crusaders winger Dallas McLeod that happened reasonably early in the game on Saturday. And initially it was only a yellow card for Lienert-Brown. I have to say that McLeod was probably the one who came off the worst in this clash. He's a new All Black himself, but he failed his HIA, his head injury assessment, and couldn't return for the rest of the game. And with that information in mind, after the game, the Commissioner reviewed the game and saw that actually that tackle was a red card offence. So that Commissioner comes from the SANZAR Foul Play Review Committee. They run the rule over these types of things, and in their judgment, they've said that the foul play was reckless, dangerous, and the direct contact from Lienert-Brown had no mitigating factors in it. So they actually deemed that a 6-week ban, but however, that's been cut in half, given that Lienert-Brown's previous clean disciplinary record and the fact that he entered a guilty plea as well. So taking it down to that 3 weeks, that up to and includes July 29. So it's those 3 games that you mentioned earlier. But also that's, again, I guess he has the opportunity to have that reduced by an additional week if he takes part in the World Rugby Coach Intervention Program. So that would move it back to July 29, which is that Wallabies game in Melbourne. So he has an opportunity potentially to be able to play in that. If he wasn't to be able to receive that, it would be quite a big blow because this is the Rugby World Cup year. So this is actually a shortened rugby championship, which is how he has the potential to miss it. Each country is only playing each other once here.
Okay, so moving on to the Black Ferns, 6 players will make their debut this week.
They will. So the Black Ferns back on the field this week for the first time since the Rugby World Cup. And it's also the first, so they're playing Australia in Brisbane. So this is going to be the first test for their new coach, Alan Bunting. And he's actually opened the door for some new players as well. The newcomers include wingers Caitlin Vaiakolo and Mirarangi Paul. And Vaiakolo is actually a former New Zealand Rugby League international. So she'll become a dual international at this point as well. And the other starter who gets her first cap is prop Kate Henwood. She was actually overlooked for Super Rugby Opiki, so this big step up for her, and she said that she never envisaged playing for New Zealand at the start of the year.
The team naming was pretty surreal when they read out the names being the first, number one. I don't think I kind of came back round to hear the rest of the team for a bit. I kind of went a bit deaf and blind at the time.
And there'll also be 3 players coming off the bench for their debuts. So that's backs Iritana Hohaia, Rosie Kelly and Sevens player Tinetti Willison.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. It is 29 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa inai called Giles Beckford, who joins us live from the Wellington studio. Hey, Giles, employee confidence slackens, but still positive?
It is still positive. The optimists outnumber the pessimists. This is a sign of the old adage, which is that the labour market is one of the last parts of an economy to slow down when you might be headed for recession, but for the very least when growth sort of stalls. As we've been seeing with other confidence surveys, consumer confidence and business confidence have been slightly improving, but they're still deep in pessimism. The labour market, it's now starting to ease. Now, Westpac McDermott Miller do this survey quarterly, and they've found that essentially that respondents are seeing fewer job offers or job opportunities out there, and that's what's weighing on them. Previously, when there was a skill shortage, confidence was sky high and people were saying, well, if I don't like this job, I can always go and get another one because there are plenty out there. Well, it would seem that the reality is now starting to face people, and they're saying, well, perhaps it's not quite so easy to find another job. I may be stuck where I am. If I got a pay rise that was good last year, I probably won't get a pay rise as good next year. So that's weighing on sentiment as well. They're seeing that surge in immigration, more people coming into the country, picking up where those skill shortages were, filling gaps in the market. So that's weighing on things. And generally is that view that unemployment will rise as a consequence of all those rate rises that the Reserve Bank has been putting into place. And expectations are that, in fact, unemployment, which is currently 3.4%, that's close to record lows, will rise to 5% or more next year. So, as I say, once again, the labour market on the turn. But for all that, people might be saying that it's it might be a jobs-rich recession if we have a recession. I might just mention a little hustle on the side, a little story on the side associated with this. We got a report out today from one of the biggest business brokerages in the country. They're saying strong interest from people, and they're all doing little jobs. They're looking for side hustle businesses, something that they can do from home or something they can do alongside their own full-time job, say as a web-based business. So the two go hand in hand, and where there's a will and people are looking for the opportunities perhaps to have their own little business on the side.
And Giles, the government's been tinkering with the Reserve Bank's riding instructions. Does this involve jodhpurs and knee-high boots?
Oh, well, I'm not quite sure how they dress in the Reserve Bank. I mean, every time I see them, they're all in pretty plain suits and ties. But it would be fair to say this is one of those things you don't think it means very much, but this is actually what the Reserve Bank's got to adhere to. The government, being the boss, says this is what we want you to do. Now, the two main things are, one is you've got to have inflation between 1% and 3% over the medium term. And the other one is that you have to support sustainable employment, not necessarily full employment, but sustainable employment. Well, they've just played with the wording a wee bit. The old rules used to say you have to keep inflation between 1% and 3%. The new rules say you have to achieve and maintain inflation between 1% to 3%. Now, it might not mean much to many people. It's giving the Reserve Bank a little bit of wiggle room. Just slipped in as a subclause is, oh, by the way, you folk at the Reserve Bank, when you're setting interest rates, you can also ignore what you might think is a temporary spike in inflation. And you remember a year or so ago, we heard that phrase a lot from Adrian Orr and others saying, don't worry about this spike in inflation, it's just temporary. Well, it hasn't proved to be just that. I think what this is actually is an acknowledgement of the changed circumstances for the Reserve Bank. Inflation is out in the paddock. It's running free, and it's a real hassle to get it back under control. They're getting closer, but it's still a hard job. These rules, aren't going to alter particularly how much the Reserve Bank does its job setting rates. But, every time something happens of some significance, people will go back to the rule book and say, you didn't stick to the rules, or you stuck to the rules too rigidly and you should have had a little bit of flexibility. So we'll wait and see whether this has any tangible effect. I suspect not.
Keeping with the theme, Giles, let's take a canter around the markets, please.
Well, first rise in a week for the local share market, but there's hardly anything to write home about. Just a 10-point gain for the top 50 index. Should note that one of the heavyweights, Mainfreight, took a little bit of a dip, not much, but it did say in its annual report today, business is tough, and it expects trading to be weaker in the near term at least. For the New Zealand dollar, 61.9 US cents and 92.1 Australian.
A pleasure, Giles. Thank you for that. Giles Beckford there joining us from Wellington. Elderly New Zealanders and people living in rural communities are worried about how they will stay connected with the world as New Zealand Post slashes its workforce. The state-owned enterprise is set to cut 750 jobs over the next 5 years as mail use continues to decline. Ashley McCall reports.
Expect to see fewer posties out and about delivering your mail over the next 5 years. Frontline posties, processing staff and company managers are among those who could be made redundant in the major restructure revealed today. NZ Post Chief Executive David Welsh says online communication has slashed demand for its services.
That's people getting their bank statements. The things that used to come through mail are now no longer needed. To give you a bit of a sense, 10 years ago, households would get about 12 items a week. We're now less than 2.
The mail service predicts post volumes will drop dramatically in coming years, from 100 million items to 120 by 2028. Compare that to 20 years ago when New Zealanders would send more than 1 billion parcels a year. While he understands there's declining demand, Postal Workers Union co-national president John Maynard says the disappearance of post boxes is already causing a headache for communities.
People will go to the postie sometime and say, do you mind taking my letter for posting because I can't find a posting box or it's too far away? So the elderly people, the people without much transport, they're quite seriously affected by fewer places to post their letters and sometimes irregular mail delivery coming to them.
The price of postage will also increase 30 cents to $2 in July. Grey Power Vice President Pete Matcham is worried what the job losses will mean for elderly New Zealanders, many of whom greatly rely on the postal service.
Around 50% will use post of preference, even if they have the opportunity and ability to use the internet. With the cost of living the way it is at the moment, they just don't have any spare cash at all. What is a small increase to many people can make a major difference to them.
And Rural Women New Zealand Chief Executive Gabrielle O'Brien is worried people will struggle to access their services as a result.
If we are sending out information to them and we need to send it by post, that increases our costs as well. There is always the potential that will lead to less services available to people, less publications or less communication.
But NZ Post Chief Executive David Welsh is reassuring rural New Zealanders that they can expect to see the same level of service.
Our rural customers will see almost no change. What we do now will continue. They currently get both their mail and parcel items delivered through the rural network. And our rural network do such a wonderful job, so that'll be unchanged.
Air2 negotiation specialist Joe Gallagher says the union is helping workers through a transitional agreement.
We just need to work through what their individual needs are so that we tailor the approach to what they want and go from there. We've run a few of these processes now and it's the best, fairest and most transparent way to get the best outcomes for workers moving forward.
Moving to a future where letters are a thing of the past.
It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming. Homai o whakaaro. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie standing by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
The Education Minister is reserving judgment on whether tertiary institutions have made some poor spending decisions over the last few years. The government announced an extra $128 million in funding for the tertiary sector, with some institutions announcing job cuts and program closures as they face budget shortfalls. Jan Tinetti told Checkpoint that she wanted to see the results of the sector funding review before making any judgments on how universities had responded to financial pressures. She says the current funding model was putting stress on the sector, which is why it's being reviewed. The country's first kaupapa Māori electricity provider says that more people are being affected by the cost of living crisis, which is why it's taking time to answer queries about why bills have tripled in some cases. Nau Mai Rā co-founder Ezra Hidawini told the program he recognised there'd been numerous complaints about poor customer service. He says that it has 5 people dealing with queries and complaints, and it takes time to figure out why bills have increased and to find solutions. And data from MB shows more than 100,000 households couldn't adequately warm their homes in the last year. The analysis showed Māori and Pasifika households, renters and low-income households were more likely to put up with feeling cold to keep costs down, major dampness or mould, and being unable to pay bills on time. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, the following roads in the central North Island are closed. State Highway 2, Matawai to Te Karaka. State Highway 50, Te Kokino. State Highway 35 between Okitsu and Ruatoria. In the Coromandel, State Highway 25 is closed and will reopen again depending on conditions for an hour in the morning, 7:30 to 8:30, and again in the afternoon for 2 hours, 3:30 to 5:30. And in Auckland, there'll be a full closure tonight westbound between Great North Road and Pārtiki Road, including the westbound State Highway 16 link to State Highway 20 southbound. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. It's crunch time for the Prime Minister during his visit to China as he gears up to sit down with one of the world's most powerful men. The meeting with President Xi Jinping is due to take place shortly before 9 o'clock tonight at the Great Hall of the People on the edge of Tiananmen Square. It comes at a critical juncture for New Zealand's relationship with China as its traditional security partners like the US and Australia take a harder line with the country. Our political editor Jane Patterson is in Beijing and joins us now. Kia ora, Jane. What should be expected from this evening's meeting? Is there going to be some haranguing going on?
Hopefully not, Lisa. This is diplomacy after all, and there's been a lot of talk about a respectful, consistent and predictable approach to the relationship with China, and New Zealand would expect the same in return. Chris Hipkins, the Prime Minister, is going to go to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing with in the next couple of hours, and they're going to have a comprehensive conversation. But he was reluctant to go into too many details about exactly the specifics of what he will talk about. However, climate change is one. Trade, of course, incredibly important to New Zealand, looking to boost trade and diversify trade. But those crunchy issues are the human rights issues, the treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan independence, and of course the Ukraine war. Now they are issues that China has already made very clear in terms of particularly Xinjiang, Hong Kong and Taiwan, of course, not the Ukraine war, that they're internal issues. They won't brook any interference or what they see as interference. And this is going to be a big test for Chris Hipkins. He has not had a lot of experience at all in diplomacy. And as you said, Nanaia Mahuta had what sounds like a robust, the word of the day, meeting in March. So whether that's a precursor to what Chris Hipkins is going to come across tonight, then we will have to wait and see.
What are we to read into those reports about the meeting that Nanaia Mahuta had?
Well, neither Chris Hipkins nor Nanaia Mahuta has denied them outright. So this was an unnamed source in the Australian newspaper saying that when Nanaia Mahuta went to Beijing in March, she was harangued for an hour, and she was asked about it, and she basically used the word robust several times. She said, look, it was a meeting where those issues that were broached, that New Zealand put its views forward very clearly, and she said the Chinese were also very clear in their position. So she also talked about a meeting that had been delayed in terms of her returning. She said that was a matter of scheduling or sequencing, and that she did still hope to come on that trip. Now, she made the point that despite that report, here Chris Hipkins is in Beijing. Here he is meeting President Xi, and her point was that if the meeting had been derailed, if it had been gone terribly badly, then none of us would be here covering it, or Prime Minister Chris Hipkins going to meet President Xi. But it really is a demonstration of the tensions around this and the careful diplomatic manoeuvring that New Zealand has to do with this incredibly important political and trade partner. As I said, it's going to really test the diplomatic chops of Chris Hipkins, probably one of the most high-stakes meetings that New Zealand Prime Ministers will get to go to. So I hope he's done his homework.
Thanks for the update, Jane. That's Jane Patterson live from Beijing. It is 14 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. All our Kuni businesses and locals are breathing a sigh of relief that this year's Mount Ruapehu ski season has been saved. A $5 million guarantee from the government allows the Turoa and Whakapapa ski fields to open from Saturday, despite Ruapehu alpine lifts being in liquidation. And for now, life pass holders can still ski. Jimmy Allingham has the story.
Uncertainty replaced with relief for business people such as Rocky Mountain Chalet's owner Will Peppel.
The $5 million is 100% something that everybody needs and wanted, but how it's, like I said, applies in the real world, and that's what we need to know.
And today it's confirmed that skiing will start on Saturday, just in time for the school holidays. Mr. Peppel says it's usually a busy period.
We're ticking along all good. There's no issues with that, but we're 100% down on what we should be for the next week with the school holidays. We're normally 100% booked back to back. We're looking at about 30% booked at the moment. So hopefully, once they put tickets up for sale, then that will change the dynamic and people will start to book.
He says he can't understate the importance of a good ski season.
We've got milk through the rest of the year, but 100% is the cream and it tops it off, and without it you do 100% miss it.
Vertigo climbing owner Jeremy Hamer agrees.
Anything that gets the ski field back up and running is going to be great for town, because town itself needs a ski field. Without that, a lot of us are going to have to close our doors, and to see Awakuni die even more than it has in the last couple of years would be a real shame. So, any little bit of help and assistance is greatly appreciated.
TCB Ski Board and Bike Director Ben Wiggins says the $5 million guarantee may indicate the process to sell the ski fields could take a while, which is a shame for bidders ready to go. But knowing the ski season will happen can only be positive.
It's fantastic that the government have actually stepped in and said, look, we want to signal to the entire country that we intend for no matter what happens, the season's going to open and go ahead.
Mr Wiggins says the government guarantee is worth it.
The mountain brings over $100 million worth of revenue to the region. It provides thousands of jobs, either on the mountain, off the mountain, or regionally, everything from hotels, restaurants, shops, just everything and everything in between, food service, bed making, there's just so many people that rely on it.
People like Black Bull Liquor co-owner Abhi Gupta.
There is not much population around over here, so the businesses basically, their major profit depends upon the ski season, so they can survive for the whole year. Because there are some months which are really, really quiet for this town, and it is hard for the businesses to keep on surviving, to pay for the staff and to manage their expenses.
And people like the Ruapehu Mountain Motel and Lodge co-owner Lee Berry.
Really good relief, yeah. We've been pretty uncertain for the last week, not sure what was going to happen and if we had any financial security, and the whole town was looking at not surviving if we didn't get that mountain going. So, yeah, really good news. I may not agree with everything the government's done, but thank you for doing this for us.
She says there's already an uptick in interest.
Starting to get a few bookings coming in. They were pretty slow and we had a lot of empty spaces traditionally, and the school holidays do get fully booked. Get in there and book quick or you might miss out now that we're up and going. We're ready to go, the ski field's ready to go. We drove up the mountain yesterday and the chairs are all on the lifts and looks like they're ready to push the buttons. So yeah, great, come and enjoy.
The pizzeria owner, Conrad Stevens, a ski life pass holder, says it's not all doom and gloom in the area.
Yeah, well, we've always been pretty positive because with a mountain like this, no way were they going to let it go into receivership or, or close down or not open for the season, because the bottom line is DOC would then be forking out somewhere between $50 to $100 million to move the infrastructure. So it's within everybody's interest just to have it open just for that reason, because that $100 million, that's taxpayers' money again.
There's not much snow on Mount Ruapehu right now, but a good dumping is forecast in coming days.
Okay, let's get to some of your feedback now. A number of you getting in touch about the government package, $128 million for universities. This listener says, it's tough for me too. Got a mill or two, please? Someone else says universities should not be businesses. And on the other hand, this listener says any wasteful spending by universities is not the government's problem. Stop blaming the government. On the issue of power bills and the company Nau Mai Rā, sorry, says this listener, come on, Ezra, this is not a good explanation for power bills tripling. What a joke. Another says, having worked for a metering company, his answers were BS. And this person, though, says, we're in Christchurch and have been with Nau Mai Rā for a couple of years without any issues. Mind you, I haven't had to contact them, so can't comment on that. I hope they can sort things out with the customers who are having problems. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The green light for lab-grown meat to be sold in American restaurants and supermarkets could be big business for a New Zealand company producing the seeds the flesh can be cultivated from. In a first, 2 companies have US Department of Agriculture approval to sell lab-grown meat commercially. It's only the second country after Singapore to green light the cultivated meat that comes from livestock cells that are fed and grown in vats. University of Canterbury biochemist Olivia Ogilvie is the co-founder and chief executive of Opo Bio, which harvests and develops the animal cells or meat seeds for the cultivated meat industry. She says the US approvals could open up significant markets for them.
We supply the seeds, which you can think of, or the cells, which you can think of as a seed. So the starting ingredients that go into making meat without an animal.
And do those seeds, as you call them, are they meat? Do they actually have meat in them? Do they come from an animal?
Yeah. So what we do is we take a sample of tissue from an animal, and from it we extract the cells that grow into meat, so things that form muscle, fat and connective tissue. And we then make those cells or seeds good at growing outside of the animal. And so there's a whole lot of science involved in that process, in adapting them to grow without the animal. And that's where our expertise is.
I can only imagine that, but in my head, I'm trying to think about how this grows. Does it grow in a dish? Does it grow in a roasting dish? Does it grow in a barrel? I mean, how does it grow and how big does it get?
Yeah, so basically what it will look like when it's actually being produced for us to eat will be more like a brewery, so big commercial bioreactors we call them, but they're very similar to what we use to brew beer, a controlled, temperature-controlled environment for the cells to grow in.
What shape is it? Because people are used to having I know it sounds weird, they're used to having a steak that is a certain shape or a piece of chicken that looks like a drumstick. So when it grows, is it a barrel shape? What does it look like?
Yeah, so what most companies are doing at the moment, because the technology is so early, they're growing them in a single cell suspension. So the cells are growing essentially floating in solution, and companies harvest that and then use food processing to make it into a structured product. Making structured foods like a steak or a chicken drumstick is the ultimate goal, but the technology is just nowhere close to that yet, I'd say.
I have to confess, this is not making me feel hungry. I imagine you've eaten the product.
I haven't actually. So since we don't make in products, I haven't actually had the opportunity to try it. And on top of that, because there's not many places there's one place in Singapore you can buy it at the moment before this approval. So I haven't even been able to buy it.
What do you know about the texture of it and the feel of it and how close that is to actual meat?
Yeah, so I think people, obviously the people who are trying it are probably proponents of it, but most people who try it say that it does cook and taste like meat, like the product that it's trying to replicate. And there's some really awesome, if you Google, for example, wild type salmon, you'll see some products which look identical to salmon, but they're made out of cultivated meat. And when you start seeing what companies are creating, I think it changes the whole way that the technology is perceived, because you're like, wow, this actually looks like a food that I eat and I can't really tell the difference.
So how long does it take to grow a slab of meat?
Companies that are doing it regularly say that it takes around 6 weeks. but it really does depend on the technical approach that the company's using. So it is a lot quicker to create products than raising an animal for a couple of years as well.
Are you doing New Zealand farmers out of a job, or where do you see this fitting?
I think the way that we see this is that it's an and, not an or, to the conventional meat industry. So we don't think cultivated meat is going to tomorrow replace traditional agriculture. It's probably never going to do that. By 2050, we need 70% more meat to feed the world. And pretty likely that we can't do that by growing 70% more animals. So we see this as one of those potential solutions to increase the production of food or protein for the world. So, and New Zealand meat is like so much different to meat in the US and all over the world. And I think we in New Zealand are just in a really privileged place and need to remember that we don't use feedlot farming like most countries do.
So potentially the market is huge. I'm just wondering how you account for the ick factor, because I think there probably is one for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. So we did some consumer research with Massey University through the academic association that we have last year. And what we found in a study of 600 residents in New Zealand was that around half of people were aware of cultivated meat in New Zealand, which we were actually pretty surprised about. And 67% of people were willing to try it. And this is relatively consistent across the world, that most people are willing to try it if it does look, cook and taste like meat. And of those 67%, 47% were willing to eat it regularly.
And that is Canterbury biochemist Olivia Ogilvie. I'm so interested in your thoughts on this. It's absolutely fascinating. 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Would you be happy to chow down on a slab of lab-grown meat? Grown in vats, she says, basically from meat cells, the seeds of meat. Let us know your thoughts. Can't wait to hear what you think. Some of your feedback on the university funding, not so pleased about that, some of you. It is abhorrent that universities would be bailed out to the tune of $128 million when many have committed substantial funds to vein building projects, while at the same time the government can't cobble together enough pennies to sufficiently improve pay or conditions for teachers. Ros has got in touch to say the government can buy out ski fields and universities, but there is no funding to give GPs to pay their practice nurses more. On the subject of power, a lot of you have got in touch. Some aroha for Nau Mai Rā. This person says, they have been my power company for a year and I haven't had any issues with the costs. Prices have gone up a lot this year, but it seems to be in line with the price of power rising in general. Another person, though, says, I get my electricity through Flick. My household average bill is $15 a week. And they reckon that Nau Mai Rā sounds expensive. Another person says they've been a customer for a year. Their bill has not increased with Nau Mai Rā. They say they love being able to talk to someone on the end of the phone. They pick up the calls immediately, they say, unlike their previous providers. And their kaupapa to combat power poverty is critically important, they say. And Tanya says, I know every bill I pay is helping someone else to be warm and dry. Ka pai, Tanya.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō ko Evie Ashton tēnei. National has labelled the government's university rescue package a band-aid bailout caused by its own mismanagement. $128 million will go to the tertiary sector over 2 years as universities threaten job and course cuts. Party leader Christopher Luxon says he supports the one-off funding boost, but argues it wouldn't be needed if he was in charge.
We wouldn't be here if we had a national government, because we wouldn't have undertaken a mega polytechnic merger that lost $200 million, seen a 10% decline in enrolments and 80% of the staff wanting to leave.
Meanwhile, the Education Minister is reserving judgment on whether tertiary institutions have made some poor spending decisions over the last few years. Jan Tinetti told Checkpoint that she wanted to see the results of a sector funding review before making any judgments on how universities had responded to financial pressures. She says the current funding model was putting stress on the sector, which is why it's being reviewed. Grey Power is worried the elderly will suffer from job cuts at NZ Post. The state-owned enterprise is set to cut 750 jobs over the next 5 years from its workforce of 4,500 employees as mail continues to decline. Grey Power Vice President Pete Matcham says many people over the age of 75 rely on the postal service as a lifeline.
Around 50% will use post of preference, even if they have the opportunity and ability to use the internet.
Pete Matcham says it's worse for the elderly living in rural areas. The second boy buried under sand dunes on Auckland's Great Barrier Island has been discharged from hospital. Riley was digging tunnels with his friend, Levi Goluboski, on June 11 when the sand collapsed on top of them. 12-year-old Levi died in hospital 4 days later. The Great Barrier Local Board held a minute of silence today in memory of Levi. British Home Secretary Suella Braverman is among those gathering in Wellington for the 5-country ministerial, describing it as an important meeting of the closest of allies. It's emerged that Immigration New Zealand is exploring a labour mobility scheme being trialled by 2 fellow Five Eyes members. Jill Bonnet reports.
The scheme would see 3 South American countries act as migrant recruitment agencies for America, Canada and Spain. It would be similar to agricultural schemes such as New Zealand's RSE, but with larger numbers and in other sectors. INZ said it was exploring how New Zealand could join and the opportunities for employers and migrants. Politicians from the 5 countries, including new Immigration Minister Andrew Little, are discussing cybersecurity, foreign espionage at universities and democratic resilience.
5 people are in hospital, 2 with serious injuries, following a 2-vehicle crash on State Highway 1 in Whakapada, Northland, this afternoon. It happened on Puhipuhi Road, just after 2 o'clock. The Green Party says Ruapehu's ecosystems should be the prime consideration in any decisions about the future of the mountain's ski fields. The government has thrown Ruapehu Alpine Lifts a $5 million lifeline so the ski season can go ahead, despite the ownership of the fields still being undecided. Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says looking after the environment should be the top consideration.
I have heard the voices of iwi and mana whenua of that rohe, whose first and foremost priority is the well-being of the maunga. So I think that goes towards actually looking at our industries as a whole and whether we are protecting the maunga and its ecosystems.
The National Party has endorsed publicly funding the ski field for another season, although ACT is describing it as another government handout. The Deputy Mayor of Christchurch is warning residents could bear the costs down the track despite keeping rates increases below inflation. The City Council adopted its annual plan for the coming year earlier today, including an overall average rates increase of 6.41%. Cost of living was a common theme for councillors after 15% rates rises had been previously forecast. But Pauline Cotter says council services could face cutback in the future due to economic uncertainty. And the Gore District Council has approved an 11% rates rise. As a result of the ructions around the council table, the annual plan process was delayed and the council didn't go to the public for formal consultation. The council has been mired in controversy since then 23-year-old Ben Bell ousted long-time incumbent Tracy Hicks as mayor last October. A prominent underworld figure has been shot dead while sitting in a car in Sydney. It's understood the shooting took place in an underground car park. The ABC's Gavin Coote has more.
Police say a man believed to be in his 40s was shot while sitting in a stationary vehicle at a car park in Bondi Junction at 8:30 this morning. He died at the scene. While yet to be formally identified, it's understood to be convicted drug kingpin Alan Meridian. A luxury car that was found abandoned nearby in Bondi Junction has been linked to the shooting. Officers are also investigating whether another car found burnt out in nearby Zetland is linked. 3 crime scenes have been established and are being forensically examined.
And Kirikiri police have stumbled onto a Jurassic discovery of King Kong proportions. While investigating a series of burglaries in the area, officers executing search warrants discovered a dinosaur statue known as Sophie and a life-size gorilla counterpart at one of the addresses. Both had been reported stolen from a commercial property last month. Police also located vehicles, vehicle parts, a commercial truck and trailer unit, cannabis and cash. 4 men have been arrested and charged. Sophie and the gorilla have been returned to their owners. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Hingarangi Forbes, host of Mata. Tonight we'll discuss the investigation into Oranga Tamariki with Children's Commissioner Judge Francis Evers. Then I'm joined by panellists Denise Roche and Tau Henare. Nō reira, ariari taringa mai kia Mata after the 6:30 news headlines this evening on RNZ National or at rnz.co.nz/Mata.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Taumaudu and Taupo, showers, especially north of Hamilton. Tomorrow, frost or fog in the south. Tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, mainly fine, isolated showers today. Hawke's Bay and Waidadapa, partly cloudy, isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning. From Taranaki to Wellington, also for Nelson, scattered showers clearing and becoming fine about and south of Manawatu tomorrow. From Bulla to Fiordland, mainly fine weather, scattered rain developing north of Greymouth tonight and elsewhere for a time tomorrow. Mostly cloudy for Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha. Rain from this afternoon, possibly heavy, clearing Marlborough and Canterbury tomorrow and becoming scattered showers elsewhere. Central Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog. Rain spreading east from this evening, becoming scattered showers later tomorrow. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy, light rain. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Fruit and veg could again be victims of the latest wild weather. At least one supermarket chain is warning broccoli, lettuce, bag salads and mandarins could be in short supply over the next few days, with transport difficulties in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Leader Brand is one of the biggest suppliers of fresh produce. CEO Richard Burke joins us now from Turanganuia, Kiwa, Gisborne. Kia ora.
Yeah, hi there, Lisa.
Hi, how have the crops fared in this latest deluge?
Look, in Gisborne, they've suffered a little bit. Like, there's definitely a bit of water damage around, and conditions are really difficult to try and do anything in the fields, obviously. But we have been.
Oh, I think we might have just lost Richard there. We'll try to get him back. Just talking to him there about the difficulties with the weather and the supply of fresh fruit and veg. Let's move on and we'll come back to Richard if we get him. So OCD sufferers and advocates say it's nearly impossible to get treatment for the disorder in the public sector unless there is blood on the floor. For one mother, it took 8 months in calling the police for her son to be seen. And another says she had to sell her possessions to pay for a private psychologist for her kids. Luca Foreman has more.
Exposure and response prevention therapy, or ERP, is considered the gold standard for treating obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD for short. It involves slowly exposing someone to their triggers under the supervision of a trained psychologist. But after waiting 8 months for the treatment through the public system, one mother says it wasn't until she called the police on her son that he was seen by a psychiatrist.
You just do hear people say, there has to be blood on the floor to be seen.
The woman, who's asked not to be named, says the psychiatrist prescribed medicine for her son, which, while helpful, wasn't the ERP therapy he needed. And while waiting for the psychological treatment that was referred at the start of last year, she has to deal with the realities of parenting a child with OCD. Dr. Paul Skirrow, who's the executive advisor for the College of Clinical Psychologists, explains what it's like to have OCD.
It might be, for instance, an intrusive thought that somebody's going to die in your family. If you don't do something which might have like a magical number, it might be like turn the light switch on and off 20 times.
But OCD can manifest itself in many ways. 19-year-old Sophie Maud couldn't say or hear the word love without feeling very uncomfortable.
The feeling when somebody puts their nails to a blackboard and they scratch down. It's that
that like awful feeling you want to throw up. It's that feeling, but it's like intensified to the max.
Sophie's mum, Sarah Gilou, says this made home life difficult.
It meant that we couldn't use the word because it would result in Sophie punishing herself for it, or the OCD would make her punish herself for it, which included physically hurting herself.
Ms. Gilou says she gave up on the public system years ago because of the long wait times. So she sold her possessions to afford private care for Sophie and her other child, Malachi, who also has OCD.
I literally sold things to get Malachi through the system. For my last son, I'd used vouchers to buy a smartwatch to go with my phone, and I ended up selling those together to get the money.
But she says even private psychologists who can perform ERP therapy have closed their wait lists due to high demand. Friends of hers have even opted for online treatment via America to get around the long waiting lists. Paul Skiro from the College of Clinical Psychologists says the shortage of people able to perform OCD therapy is partly down to it being a niche area of study.
If we trained, 100 more psychologists, only a small proportion of them would have a specific interest in OCD.
Te Whatu Ora mental health clinical lead, Murray Patton, acknowledges there's a shortage of workers who can deliver specialist services like ERP. He says improving the psychology workforce is one of the agency's priorities, and it's increasing the number of internships in the field, as well as establishing 4 new training hubs. He says 10 new postgraduate courses for upskilling mental health professionals include papers on treating people with OCD.
And that was Luca Foreman reporting. Let's go back to our earlier story about how fruit and veg are faring after this latest bout of wild weather. We were talking to Leaderbrand CEO Richard Burke, who was joining us from Gisborne. Are you back on the line there, Richard?
Yeah, I am. Apologies for that.
No problem at all. Hey, talk to me about the crops and which ones, have come off second best in the weather.
Yeah, look, it's quite varied as it always is in these sort of events, and we're just dealing with prolonged wet weather in Gisborne, which will have effect on any crop that's in the ground at the moment. So, the salad crops will be a little bit delayed, and we would have lost a little bit, but we've still got good crop in Matamata and Pukekohe and the South Island. So there's still plenty out there. But there is a number of difficulties around at the moment, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I imagine roads are one of them. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. We're dealing in a product that carries very limited shelf life. So, we're really harvesting it today and shipping it out overnight and wanting to deliver it into DC. So, we've only got a couple of days to sell product. And when roads go out, your whole logistics chain really gets disrupted, and we're currently swinging trucks south to go north. So, we're adding 3-4 hour trip to a truck, which is usually doing crossovers in Tauranga. And so, our logistics have really been shot to pieces this week, and we're really just trying to re-establish those while we work through the issues on the road.
So that's cause of issues on State Highway 2, right?
Yeah, just north of Gisborne, to be fair, there was some flooding issues late last week, and then we've got some slip issues on one of the first hills out of Gisborne. And, it's just further emphasising our frail infrastructure that we've got here that's taken a bit of a hit through a couple of cyclones, and you get this sort of weather, and it's quite a problem for us to maintain.
So 2 things there. First off, Richard, the long way round with the trucks, is that costing you more? Because we spoke to one company who said they're having to put a surcharge on because sometimes they're coming in or out with empty trucks because of the situation with damage.
Yeah, well, we're paying that surcharge. So, yes, it's definitely costing us more money.
What percentage are you getting on top of what you'd normally pay? Is it 50% more?
I think, I don't know the exact figure, and I don't know that it's been negotiated, but I would have thought it's a 50% increase, yes.
Okay. And why is that?
Well, there's a number of reasons. One, you've got a 3-hour longer truck trip. 2, you've got limited amount of hours that drivers can drive. So, their normal routes are disrupted where they'll be crossing over in Tauranga. Then they have to rehouse them in Taupo until the road goes back to normal. So there's a number of changes that you have to make to your logistics to be able to pull off this. So, it's a case of it's costing everyone more money, and in the end that we have to foot that bill.
So when a person goes into the supermarket to buy one of your products that have come from Gisborne, is that going to be a little bit more expensive over the next couple of weeks because of that?
See, this is where it gets really interesting because the price of fresh is really dictated by supply and demand. So the bigger issue will be around what sort of supply is available, and that will set the market. We're not a cost-plus industry, so we don't say it cost us, let's say, $2 to grow that broccoli, so we're going to charge that to the consumer. We're about selling the volume that we have available, and so, price is all about supply and demand, and cost has got very little to play in it on a daily basis anyway. Obviously, on a long-term basis, people make decisions around their business, whether they're making money or not, but certainly price is a lot about supply and demand. So I don't think you'll necessarily see that. Salads is obviously a fixed price deal anyway. It doesn't fluctuate. So the consumer won't really notice if it's an extra freight cost or there's just a tightening of supply.
Richard, in terms of the roads, you can't go in the brace position every time it rains, right? So into the future, what is your message about resilience?
Yeah, look, and we're not trying to lay blame here because it's a tough, we've got a tough gig down here at the moment, and there's a lot of people doing some really hard work to try and keep things open for us, which we really appreciate. But at the end of the day, we've invested a heck of a lot in our business, and there's a lot of businesses in this region that have, and the region's actually been pulling its weight and delivering quite well to the national economy. We're a big part of the food security in New Zealand. We're over 50% of the broccoli business. We're 45% of the salad business. There's a large chunk of sweet corn and watermelons and citrus that comes out of this region. So we play quite a vital role in that national food supply. So, the access and the infrastructure we need to be able to maintain that is critical. And whilst it's great to try and keep it open, we really need to think about a long-term resilience for our road north and what that means for us as a region and for us as a nation, because we cannot afford that road to keep chopping out and affecting not only this region but the whole of New Zealand.
Right now, what's the soil like? Can you plant crops?
Not in Gisborne at the moment, we're too wet. I mean, we've had our first half day of sunshine for probably 3 weeks, and certainly the hill country is pretty ugly. There's a lot of it that is slipping away, so we won't be planting anything out in the open. We've got some indoor stuff that's going in, but we are shipping plants up to our farm in Pukekohe and getting the guys in Matamata to put a bit more in, so we're keeping the supply up. So, look, we're hoping that it won't be too much of an issue within for consumers, but it's winter and it's only the start of winter, so hopefully it's a disruption that we won't see repeated, but more than likely we will.
Thanks for your time, Richard. All the best. That is Leaderbrand CEO Richard Burke, who was joining us there from Gisborne. Waka Kotahi is as confident as it can be that a new bridge to join up a badly damaged Coromandel State Highway will be finished by March next year, even though it hasn't signed a construction contract yet. State Highway 25A, which is the main route to the Coromandel, was wiped out in severe weather earlier this year, leaving a massive gaping canyon in its place. The roading agency has chosen a preferred group of contractors to build a bridge and reconnect the road, but it hasn't sealed an official deal. Meanwhile, prep work at the site is already underway with a bold commitment to reopen 25A in 9 months instead of the 14 a project like this would normally take. Waka Kotahi's Joe Wilton is quietly confident it can be done.
That date is one that we feel comfortable with. There is, of course, the generic caveats because we don't have a crystal ball. So things like, say, we have another pandemic or an earthquake in that area, clearly that will have an impact on the work going on.
So normally a build of this size would take 12 to 14 months. Why are you so confident it can be done faster? What are you going to do that's different?
Typically, a bridge of this size, 110 metres long, would take 12 to 14 months to construct. With this particular bridge, what we've looked at is how we can accelerate the works, and that includes working 24 hours a day and also the 7 days a week. Because of where it's located, it makes it easier to do that. So we've looked at how we can structure the crews, where they're going to be sort of live during the time, or be accommodated, how we can make sure that their health and safety and their well-being is looked after while we do this project. And we've managed to sort of work it out that we think we can accelerate it so that we can get it completed by the end of March.
So 24/7 means more workers. Where are they coming from, and where are they going to be accommodated?
So the workers are coming from some of our crews from all around the North Island, from our contractors' crews, and we're looking at accommodating at least 80% of them in the peninsula, the Coromandel Peninsula itself, so that they can be basically driven to site and back to their accommodation. We're looking at catering 3 meals a day for them so that they don't have to worry about that. So literally they're getting driven to the site, have a 1 hour handover, 10 hours of productive time, an hour handover to the crew that comes back, and then driven back home where they'll be fully fed.
So, Jo, have you got any idea of which communities they're staying in? Because obviously a lot of the settlements there are really missing out economically because this road is out, and they'd be pretty grateful for the business that these workers would bring.
Yes, and we are looking at, so our contractors have been looking at the settlements and looking at both sides of where the slip has occurred, because obviously we just need to get them to the site. We don't necessarily have to get them across the slip. So we are looking at the likes of the Tairua side and also in the Kopu Thames area.
So are there going to be penalties included in any contract that you sign up? So if people run overtime, are there going to be any financial penalties? Will there be a completion date as a condition of the contract?
Yes, we will have a completion date as part of the contract, and yes, we are looking at what penalties we can put in there to make sure that we achieve that date. Obviously, our contractors have been working with us to try and get this project going and also to get it delivered as quickly as possible. So, I mean, working 24/7 takes a commitment from both ourselves, our professional services providers, and the contractors themselves as well to try and achieve that. We have to work together.
Jo, you've got a preferred consortium, so why don't you have a contract signed up yet? What's the hold-up?
So it's like when you build or buy a house, right? You kind of look at the land, you look at the house, and you go, well, I kind of want this. And then you sit there and negotiate it, but you have an idea of what you want. And it's very similar with our contracts. We know what we want. We know we want a bridge. We know it's 110 metres. But then there's the finer details that we're still working through, which is why the contract is taking so long. But that doesn't mean that we actually haven't started work, because what we do is we know that we need pile casings for the piles. They've already been ordered. We've undertaken to purchase those. So they've been ordered. We know we need plate for the bridge beams. That's available in the country. That's already been procured as well. So there are things we can do to make sure that even while we sort out the contract, we can still progress works. And it's actually quite common for us to do this in our traditional work.
When do you need to get this contract signed? If you're going to finish it by March 2024, this bridge, you obviously need to get a contract locked in pretty quickly. So what's your expectations on when that will happen?
We will have the contract signed in July.
Okay. And
2023.
The thing is, weather's been pretty bad recently, and obviously people have been on site. Is there any indication that there's further damage, or the land is still moving, or there may be more complications for you?
We were up on site this morning having the dawn blessing, and as part of that, one of our maintenance contractor was handing over the site to the consortia for them to take over and manage the health and safety on. And we certainly had a good view of the site, and there hasn't been any more damage. There is still a lot of water up there, but that is also one of the first things that they are starting to deal with now. And they started today was to divert the water away from the slip face and actually control where it goes.
And that was Jo Wilton from Waka Kotahi. President Putin has held a meeting with his security officials, including the Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, as he tries to present an image of business as usual following a short-lived mutiny over the weekend. The sacking of Mr. Shoigu and the military chief of staff had been one of the demands of the head of the Wagner private army, Yevgeny Prigozhin. But Mr. Putin has also given a national television address in which he claimed he'd let the mutiny go on as long as it did to avoid bloodshed. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg reports.
It was the end of his mutiny and the last time we saw Yevgeny Prigozhin. Under a deal with the Kremlin on Saturday, the Wagner chief had pulled back his fighters in exchange for immunity from prosecution, and he agreed to move to Belarus. It's not clear where he is now. But today, Mr. Prigozhin posted this message. He hadn't tried to overthrow Russia's government, he said. It was just a protest to stop Wagner being disbanded and to punish those who'd made mistakes in what he called the special military operation in Ukraine. To try to reassert his authority, President Putin summoned security chiefs to a late-night meeting. Since his TV address on Saturday, he'd stayed silent on the mutiny that he's called an act of treachery. Tonight, he addressed the nation again.
It was the patriotism of our citizens, the consolidation of the whole of Russian society that played the decisive role in these events. This support helped us overcome the most difficult challenges that our motherland faced. Thank you for this.
After a weekend of high drama, in the Russian capital, it didn't feel like victory. The mutiny had failed, but there are still more questions than answers about what had happened, and a lot of uncertainty about what's in store. Russian officials have been queuing up to denounce Mr. Prigozhin as a traitor. But Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin also blamed the West today for what had happened. Russia, he said, had faced a challenge to its stability. We need to rally around the president. State TV was on message. The presenter claims that Russians had united to support Vladimir Putin and denounce treachery. Our enemies were in ecstasy during the mutiny, she said. The traitor Yevgeny Prigozhin did a good job for Western propaganda. But at the newspaper kiosk, I discovered a different reaction. In the dailies, it was less blame the West and much more, where is Russia heading? Russian newspapers are really interesting on this today. Even though the media landscape here is heavily controlled by the state, some of the papers are saying things the Kremlin isn't. For example, this paper says that with the mutiny, Russia has demonstrated its vulnerability to the whole world and to itself. And this paper calls what Mr. Prigozhin has done an unprecedented challenge to Vladimir Putin. It says it will have long-term consequences for Russia. Events seem to take the Kremlin by surprise. Did 2 decades in power make Vladimir Putin too confident?
After 23 years, I mean, you do lose your sense of reality. In a giant country like this, when everything is in the center and everybody is doing everything at your whim, you would be incredibly great person not to lose your marbles this way.
He's under pressure. But don't write off Vladimir Putin. One thing he's learnt since coming to power is how to stay there.
All right, some of your feedback before we head off for the evening. A lot of conversation on the lab-grown meat, and it's a mixed bag. Sandy says, no way would I eat it. I would rather eat vegetarian meals, which I do about 2 times a week, than man-made meat. Another person says, it sounds very much as if New Zealand has the goose that lays the golden egg. How do we protect the technology for the production of these meat seeds that are so crucial to the offshore market? Another says, is the ick value of the meat counteracted by the no-killing production of the same meat? Good question. Can't answer it for you. And Andrew says, the meat from a vat is tech bro hype. Another yikes, no thanks. I'll stick to hunting my own free-range, natural, organic meat. And another person says, where can I get it? In Kapiti. Nowhere just yet. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow from 5 a.m. for First Up. They asked the Tertiary Education Union if the government's $128 million payout will be enough to save the sector. Don't forget to tune in for that one, 5 a.m. on First Up. We'll catch you later in the afternoon.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Nationals leader says the government's decision to create a mega polytech is one of the reasons the tertiary sector needs a bailout to prevent job cuts. Grey Power says around 50% of older people regularly use mail, and the group is concerned about how planned job cuts at NZ Post will affect services. The Christchurch Council will increase rates by 6.41%, but the Deputy Mayor is warning residents could bear more costs further down the track. And Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces say they'll observe a ceasefire in the war with the army during the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, founding editor of People magazine Landon Jones says being famous has become a weapon of mass destruction, with social media giving anyone a platform to say whatever will command our attention. He shares an insider's view of the celebrity industrial complex where fame rather than accomplishment is everything when he talks to Susie Ferguson, filling in on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow here on RNZ National.
Kia ora, you're still with me, Evie Ashton, through till 7. Right now it's time for Mata, hosted by Mihingarangi Forbes, bringing you the latest on politics with a range of Māori commentators and newsmakers. Today, Children's Commissioner Judge Francis Evers speaks about the investigation into Oranga Tamariki. Then panellists Denise Roche and Tau Hinare discuss the National Party conference, Labour's new candidate in Ikaroa Rāwhiti, and the Health Equity Assessment Tool.
Ka huri te ao, ka kitea ngā mata o te marama, hua mai, riko mai, tēnei tātou e hora atu nei I ngā kōrero o te ao huri ki te mata o te whenua. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai Pāho and the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Lots to talk about with our panellists, Tau Hinare and Denise Roche, including the Health and Equity Adjuster, Heather Skipworth's resignation from Te Pāti Māori, and another failed attempt to establish the Kermadec Ocean Sanctuary. Tēnā hei whakarewa I ngā matapakinga I tēnei hōtaka ka aro atu tātou ki te oranga o te hunga taiohi. Oranga Tamariki is the subject of an investigation after allegations two staff engaged in inappropriate sexual behaviour.